The idea behind today's podcast is to look a bit further at the universe we rarely see. Really to look at the spaces in between what is real and what is illusion. Are we capable of seeing true two-dimensional space, or are we bound to our three-dimensional perspectives? This is so relevant to our recovery. In an addiction, we lose sight of reality and get lost in our minds. It's not even necessary to use drugs or alcohol to lose touch with real life and go spiraling out of control. Finding a way back can be a real challenge. This is where true restoration to sanity lies. I found the material in this podcast very interesting and enjoyed the discussion. I hope you do too. There's a chap who wrote a book called Flatland, a chap by the name of Edwin Abbott. And it was a very, very interesting book. I heard about it and I went and bought a copy and had a look at it. And it's written like a novel, but he's got some very, very interesting ideas that generate quite a bit of interesting thought. The idea behind Flatland is two-dimensional space. Now we exist in three-dimensional space. We've got height, we've got depth, we've got width. We can see three-dimensional space. When we talk about something that is two-dimensional, you're talking maybe your TV screen. Your TV screen is maybe two-dimensional. Lines on a page. But lines on a page are not actually two-dimensional, because the height of the ink creates a third dimension so that you can see what is written on the page, because we don't really have the technology to do it another way. I suppose if you write with a stylus on the screen of a tablet, but then you're dealing also with light, so there's also depth with something like that, something that is completely flat. An interesting thought that occurred to me while I was looking at this stuff is your shadow. Does your shadow have dimension? Is your shadow one-dimensional or two-dimensional? Obviously it follows you everywhere, but is it possible to measure the thickness of something like that? If you shine a film onto a projector screen, does the light reflecting on that projector screen have a thickness, or is it two-dimensional? Is it completely a flat surface? And the way that I think about it when I think about these things is that anything, if we talk about length and width and we subtract height, kind of the picture that's generated in my mind is something that's invisible. How do you see something if it doesn't have any if there's no height dimension? And then of course we have our dimension, which is three-dimensional, where light plays a big part. You can see direction because of light. Obviously, if there was no light and you don't know where you are and you can't make your way through anything, light plays a tremendous role in the third dimension and interpreting our position in space. Where am I in the space that I occupy? And the objects that I see, where are they in relation to me? And what are their measurements? What do they look like? What space do they occupy? Part of the discussion that he has is that there are various groups. So he creates a whole explanation of a dimension of a place. And there are various groups of people. So your soldier... So it's quite paradoxical, because he says that women are a line, straight line. And he doesn't say that the next lowest class, which is soldiers, are an isosceles triangle. But it's very close to a straight line with just a small little isosceles triangle has two sides that are equal and one side that is unequal. But then he devotes a whole chapter to where women fit in and the strength that women have in relation to the whole society. So it was quite interesting how he sets the whole thing up. If you read a lot of the literature and what people have to say about this chap and the way that he wrote this book, it was written in the Victorian era. So it's very Victorian ideas about things. Anyways, we have the soldiers are isosceles triangles. The next class up are the middle class, which are equilateral triangles. So triangles that have the same length on all their sides. The gentry, squares, in the square class. The nobility have 5 sides or more, depending. And then the circles are the priests, which are the highest class. And looking at this whole thing from trying to understand it in my mind, trying to grasp the concept of what he's saying in the text and trying to picture it in my mind, is there's no height, so you're dealing with a completely what to verbalize would be a flat land. And what he's saying with these shapes that he sees is that all that he can see in his land is a line anyway. He can't see in his environment if there are triangles or if there are squares. Which raises the question then, how do you begin to identify who is what in the society? He points out two other interesting facts. The one interesting fact is how would light affect a dimension where in essence there is no, it's an invisible dimension, where light is very much a part of the third dimension. And the other interesting point, what was the other interesting point? That there's a barrier to entry for the higher classes, to the higher classes. So in very rare circumstances, isosceles triangle will give birth to a equilateral triangle. And what that does is that gives hope to the lower classes that if they do their things right, then they will have children who will be able to work themselves up the ladder. But then you've also got the higher classes who don't really want the peasants getting too clever and starting to rise up the system. So they have a little bit of hope that they can improve themselves, and from this side it's like quite a barrier to entry because it's not really something that happens. So it's kind of like a very fine balance in keeping peace in the population. Now, to tell direction, they have a very strong pull to the south. That's how they know where they are in relation in their world. There's in areas where the magnetism, where the draw to the south isn't very strong and they don't know where they are, if they stand still for a while and wait perhaps for the elements like the rain to come down, then it becomes a little bit easier for them to tell in which direction that they're moving in, so then they can move in the direction that they need to. Part of the etiquette is that, like in our society, when we open the door for a lady or pull out a chair or something like that, they have to then pass to the north because it requires more strength to go around the north to give the lady the the easier path. So there's this constant pull to the south. Now I was thinking about that specifically in the way that we look at the directions of the compass in three-dimensional space. The way that we look at the compass is our compasses point magnetic north. Magnetic north is not true north. True north is a few degrees off magnetic north. And when you hold a compass, you hold the compass flat. And it points in the direction of the pole. But we all also know that there are also other directions. The only directions of the compass that we use, north, south, east, west, and the gradients between them, there's also up and down, and at a 45-degree angle, and at a 60-degree angle. So there's quite a lot of scope in three-dimensional space to orientate ourselves and look at where we are to establish our direction, where the compass point that we use is north, the compass point that they use is south. Theoretical physicists, scientists talk about the second law of thermodynamics and the law of entropy. And when scientists talk about laws, if anybody knows anything about the way that scientists operate, they don't want anything, they won't accept anything without proof that has been verified and verified and verified and has been able to stand up to kind of the most robust scrutinization. So when they say that something is a law, then it's something that is been able to be proven without doubt. And the law of thermodynamics is that, and it's quite simple. If you take a jug of boiling water and you put it on the countertop, even if you just hold it in space, it is going to cool. Temperature is going to dissipate. And this ties in with entropy. Entropy states that all things over time disintegrate. The example that they use is if you build a sandcastle on the beach. You guys who've been here longer might have heard me talk about this. If you build a sandcastle on the beach, there's much less of a chance of that sandcastle staying exactly how it is or getting bigger than it over a period of time falling apart and disintegrating. That's part of the laws of the universe, is that everything over time goes through a process of entropy, which is why when we talk about the points of the compass is that there's always a pull on us. There's always a pull on us that if we are conscious of it, are working to overcome and to stay ahead of. So you get a tea cozy, figure out a way how to keep your jug of hot water warm. Maybe put some tea leaves in the hot water so that you can have a cup of tea. All of this stuff fascinates me so much because when and just in this group, if we evaluate ourselves in relation to each other and where we're sitting and what we see, we're all human, so we're all a straight line, but then we start interpreting what we see based on the representation that is given to us. So everybody's got 10 fingers, 10 toes, 2 eyes, a nose. You know, we all have the same shape, but then our interpretation of what we see and the value that we put on these things and the way that we put these things together is a process that takes place in our mind. An example that I often use, and please don't yawn when you hear it, is when you put a straw in a glass of water and You think the straw is, you know in your mind that the straw is going straight down to the bottom. But when you look in the water, it's bent at an angle. So if you're looking at all the information that you're taking in, and that information that you're taking in is being refracted slightly off of what it actually is, and everything is an interpretation, how do you know that what you are seeing is real or not? And that is the very, very basis and the very, very foundation of surrender. The very, very foundation of letting go is that realization that what I am perceiving might not actually be what is taking place. And perhaps, for a moment, I should suspend judgment and evaluate and take stock of what I'm seeing to see if it is real or if it is not. To see if there is truth in what I'm seeing or if there is no truth in what I'm seeing. So scientists like to talk, and I love it when they talk about this stuff. I listen very carefully and I pay close attention when they start talking about the Big Bang and the Big Bang theory. And I often get an idea when they talk about the Big Bang and the Big Bang theory that it actually happened somewhere. But when they talk about this theory, they're not specifying that it happened somewhere. Well, they are specifying that it happened somewhere, or is it something that happened in a moment in time? And that it didn't actually have a location. But we want to assign a location. The reason why and why it interests me so much is because it's so, I can say with such a blasé attitude, you know what, that's just a theory. That whole Big Bang thing is just a theory. They don't know, because they don't know. And the reason why they are why they cling on to this theory with so much enthusiasm, perhaps not a good way of saying it, but the reason why they cling on to this theory is because they believe that a lot of the science backs up to approximately 90% certainty that this is what happened. So they are looking at the stars and they are measuring the light from 30 years ago to now with different technology, because if a star shines with a specific light, it's at a specific distance and perhaps has a specific gas, whereas if it's closer and shines a different color. So they're able to measure all of these elements, and what they're saying with the measurement of all of these elements is that our galaxies, our universe, not our galaxy, our universe is expanding. I was listening to something where everybody knows what a galaxy looks like. They theorize that there's a black hole in the middle of a galaxy. They also theorize that the stars that are spinning around the edge of the galaxy are spinning at the same speed as the stars in the middle of the galaxy. That everything is moving at the same speed. That's just an interesting little side note. So they are measuring everything and trying to understand how the universe came into being. But there's no definitive proof. Part of the theory that they've come up with, which is why life functions on Earth the way that it functions, is that when this explosion happened, there was a particle cloud that cooled, and all the elements in that particle cloud all cooled in a specific pattern or a specific direction, which enabled us to experience life. So one of the things that I spoke about in spiritual group was a thing called morphic resonance. And morphic resonance is the experiments that they've done, if I explain it in brief. They've done over 1,000 experiments on animals, on dogs and cats. Because dogs and cats have a tendency to be able to identify when their owners are coming home. And the way that they've done this experiment is in different locations, with different cars, at different times. 1,000 experiments, they've been able to prove that somehow pets know when their owners are coming home. Not all pets, obviously, but pets know when their owners are coming home. So this particle cloud that we can't see, obviously, in the vacuum of space, and in a vacuum there's nothing there. They're saying that this is what has happened. And the reason why they are looking at this kind of stuff is to identify why is it that the dog knows. How is it that you will have heard this many times, perhaps from your mum, or if you're a mum, you have a feeling something is wrong with your child, or I know, how do you explain that? Mental telepathy kind of thing in the vacuum of space where there is nothing. Is it because we have air here? Because there's oxygen here? Because we can communicate telepathically? And that was part of the reason why they built the Hadron Particle Collider in Switzerland under the mountain. And if I understand all the gossip and the rumors as to why they decided to build the Higgs boson particle collider under a mountain in Switzerland, is because they were worried that they would blow the crap out of everything. So best to do it underground. Huge machine, millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars, or euros, or whatever it is that they spent on this creation. And the idea behind this creation was they created a vacuum. I just wanted to mention quickly, a sound cannot travel in a vacuum. If you ring a bell and in a jar slowly start removing the air out of the jar, no sound travels. So in the vacuum of space, there's no sound. Light, so sound waves and light waves. So the sound waves can't move without air, but the light waves operate on completely a different level, which is very, very complicated, and I have to spend ages studying it to try and explain it. Nevertheless, they create this vacuum in the CERN particle collider and bombard particles into this vacuum to see if they can create something out of nothing. This is just in layman's terms how I understand it. And as a result of the experiments, they have found that in the vacuum of space there are particles. Then there's a whole nother debate about dark matter and dark gravity or something like that. I mean, we don't even understand how gravity works. So when we start looking at dimensions, when we start looking at measurements, when we start trying to figure out and we start trying to understand, there are a lot of things that can be proven, and there's a lot of things that are unknown. That sometimes it's best to suspend judgment and to suspend evaluation. And when I look at my own recovery and I look at the journey that I've taken, removing chemicals from my system is a start. It's a very, very good starting point, because anything that I look at and anything that I evaluate, if I'm putting chemicals in that line of sight, I'm clouding what it is that I'm actually seeing by the impact that those chemicals are having on me. So it's very important to first remove the chemicals. The next step then, so that doesn't immediately, and this is what 100% true for my experiences, just because I move the chemicals from my body doesn't mean all of a sudden that I'm able to understand truth, and I'm able to see what is going on, and I'm able to evaluate accurately what is taking place. There is work that needs to be done in suspending judgment on an ongoing basis, giving myself time to evaluate properly and to consult, because community is so important. Other people's opinions are so important. To have one person trying to figure out on their own what they need to do and where they need to go, compared to having 2 or 3 people working together to try and figure out in which direction we're going to go and how we are going to address obstacles, is much easier. I mean, that's just common sense. You know, if I consult with people and we talk about things and we see what are we going to do and how we're going to make it through and in which direction we're going to go, or am I determined to do it my way and I don't care what anybody says and it's my plan and I don't care if my plan works and I don't care if my plan doesn't work, it's my plan. And that's all I care about is how that makes me feel. There's one other dimension to it. I don't know how many dimensions there are, but there's one other dimension that I'd like to speak about, and that's something that is one-dimensional. It's something that is one-dimensional. So one dimension is time. Time is one dimension. For time travel to be possible, that would mean that there must be another dimension available to circumvent time, because time is moving. Time waits for no man. What we talk about in this treatment center is, to the very best of our abilities, to be present in our life. You know, stop wasting time on useless evaluations and be present in your life and enjoy the experiences that you are experiencing. I'm sure even if you've walked past someone watching a sci-fi movie, you will have heard about wormholes. And the idea behind wormholes is that they fold time and circumvent the whole time process. That Star Trek Enterprise, going at warp speed, uses I don't even know what it uses. Gravity. Uses gravity, doesn't use time. So we have one-dimensional space, which is unchangeable and constantly moving. We have two-dimensional space, and I suppose when we talk about pure two-dimensional space, can it even be seen? We have three-dimensional space, the space that we occupy, with everything that involves. And then the question is around fourth-dimensional space. Is there more? Is there another way to do? How do I know? What do I need to do? Is there work to be done? How do I apply myself to that process? And this is where we talk about spirituality.